It's always great to be here and see you all and welcome new people here. Because there are a few new people here, I'll just quickly say a bit about Don't Divide Us, if that's okay, before introducing our wonderful speakers and what this is about. So Don't Divide Us, I was unsure to be called a founder because it was not really founded by me as such. It kind of grew organically out of responses to the Black Lives Matter protest in 2020, when a lot of people responded to an open letter written by, among other people, Baroness Claire Fox, outlining some of the problems of the protest movement in terms of its divisiveness and highly radical partisan approach to social relationships in general. And anyway, a lot of people responded to that, and Claire contacted me and said, would you chair a meeting by Zoom, which I agreed to, and it sort of took off from there really. And initially a lot of the people that were contacting us were parents whose children were going back to schools after lockdown and were coming back with letters and material that was baffling, to parents who had grown up believing and teaching their children that colour didn't matter, that you treat people according to their character. They were coming back with being told the opposite. Their kids were coming back being told the opposite at school, that colour did matter, and that if you didn't see colour, then you need to educate yourselves, and teachers and lots of organisations and charities and NGOs who are totally unaccountable to anybody would help them re-educate themselves. So that really is Don't Divide Us' narrow mission from that point grew to, well, we have to have that common sense approach to race questions based on universal principles, classic liberal principles that I'm sure we're all familiar with: tolerance, freedom, equality. Those have to be maintained and defended, and those opinions have to be allowed to be aired in public discourse. They can't be allowed, we can't allow them to be stigmatised and be seen as shameful in some way. So things that I would never in my life have thought we would have to do, and I grew up as from an immigrant family, and that was what my parents taught me, that was what they loved about Britain, that was the era I grew up in. So anyway, so that's what Don't Divide Us does. Since then we've campaigned particularly around the questions of education, but what we've found more and more, and this is leading into our current project, which is about to be finished, which is a report on the Equality Act, because what we've found is that often behind a lot of these initiatives that are re-racialising, I would say, society, whether it's in schools or the arts or accounting or chartered surveying, or wherever you go, nobody doesn't have an equity and diversity policy there. And it's not because they're all necessarily committed to woke or left-wing Marxists, it's because they have to have an equity and diversity policy there. It is now the law. So that is why we decided to try and unpick this a bit through looking at the Equality Act, and our report is just finishing editing the final bits of it. It'll be out soon. Please do look out for it. I'll let you know, Chris, when it is out. There's a lot of interest in it because the Equality Act has been under a lot of public scrutiny, rightly so. And one of the things where we see the Equality Act having a very big influence, and not a week goes by without a press story about the NHS. It's racist. It's systematically racist. Midwives, black babies are dying more than white babies. Doctors killing black patients more than white babies, etc., etc. It goes on. All based on very, very partial and inadequate readings of statistical disparities, which have time and time again have been discredited, but that doesn't stop the ball rolling in that way. Just to give you a little flavour from some of our findings, just to tease you a bit before I introduce the two Carols, hopefully. You won't be surprised to hear that the NHS is the largest so we have looked at over 5,000 employment tribunal cases that have been brought under the allegations of race discrimination. We looked at from 2017 to 2024. Since 2017, anyone want to have a guess at how many employment tribunals there have been? Not just with race relations, but all over. Give me a number.
Thousands.
Over 200,000. Over 200,000. Okay. So, obviously, we did not have the resources to look at all 200,000. We thought sensibly being Don't Divide Us will restrict it to race. And in our findings, we took a sample of about, from 2017, there have been over 5,000 of those have been race discrimination related, often with other things brought in like unfair dismissal or sex discrimination or disability. So we've looked at those. NHS is the largest. There were, out of our 5,000, 512 cases involved the NHS, various trusts across nationally. Out of 512 cases, how many do you think were upheld as being, yes, race discrimination has happened here?
512.
Yeah. 19. 19. That's 4%. So you can cut that different ways. There are lots of different ways of interpreting it. I mean, if you're a social justice activist, you'll say, that tells you the judiciary is totally racist and biased. For more sensible people, you'll think, well, actually, perhaps most of the judiciary is doing a fairly good job most of the time, but there are definitely worrying signs that will be worrying unless somebody stops them. You know, they're not going to go away. And Carol will tell you more about that. It's not surprising. The Equality Act came into being in 2010. It sits on the back of, there was a previous Equality Act in 2006. And that, of course, sort of came on the back of various discrete anti-discrimination legislation from 1965. In the NHS, in 2011, there was the first equality and diversity system set up. They issued a report the following year. 2014, there was an NHS Equality and Diversity Council established. 2015, there was a Workforce Race Equality Standard, who then issued their report a year later. And that last report that said, that the BME employees have to have equal access to career opportunities and receive fair treatment. And in 2017, all independent healthcare providers also have to publish their figures, their monetary figures, under RES, the Workplace Race Equality Standard data. So you can see that the Equality Act isn't just a piece of legislation sitting up there. It has birthed all these sort of mini institutions, and they're really operating like a racialised subset of the state within bigger organisations that most people accept and don't really realise that they're very different. So that's just to put you in the picture. Please look us up. Please look out for news of our report, because it will have a lot more information in that. And to see, I think we're very lucky. We're going to have two people here who work within the NHS or have worked within the NHS. They know it very well, and they can give you a very good idea of how this rolls out in everyday practice and experiences of people. Both of them are extremely brave. I'm in awe of both of them. And this is Carol Sherwood, who is a clinical psychologist and has also set up critical therapy antidote and is involved in other campaigning groups, basically to try and make sure that, as far as possible, that the field of therapy, psychology, remains a therapeutic profession in the proper sense, in the sense of helping people acclimatise to reality rather than take off into fantasy land. And then we've got Carol Richardson, who is a. Do you want to? I'm going to. When you speak, I'll ask you to come and sit here.
Okay.
But Carol is a health assistant in York and Scarborough NHS Trust. And I'm not really going to say much about Carol's experience because she's the person to best tell you about it. But without further ado, now how are we going to go? You're going to go first, Carol?
Yeah. So, Yes, Save Mental Health. Just a quick thing about Save Mental Health. I'm on the advisory council of Don't Divide Us.
Sorry, how could I forget?
No, that's all right.
Yeah.
That's all right. So Alka and I work very closely together. But I also run this campaign called Save Mental Health. And the major thing that we're trying to do at the moment is work with the Free Speech Union to do a survey of people who have been cancelled to see what effect it has on their mental health and their lives, because we think that is really important. So watch out for that. That's something really good that we're hoping to do quite soon. So, EDI and the NHS, what you need to know. I expect you know quite a lot of this already, but let's see. How many of you actually don't know what EDI is? No, I didn't think so. Okay. So,
Can I just ask, why do they keep moving the letters around?
why do they keep moving the letters around? DEI. It's DEI in the States. Others know it as DIE, or that's what they want it to be. Calls it DIE. It's DEI in the US and it's EDI here. Don't ask me why, but they all mean the same thing. So we've got equality or equity. Equity, as I'm sure you're aware, is a very different thing from equality, but it's used interchangeably, so you're kind of tricked into thinking that they're the same thing, but they're not. Equality is equality of opportunity, as you know. Equity is equality of outcome, which we will have a look at in a moment because it brings problems. Diversity, isn't it lovely? We're all so diverse and we're so inclusive, and it all sounds so virtuous, doesn't it, and lovely, but it isn't. It really isn't, as I'm sure you're painfully aware. I'm going to give you an example here from the States. Health equity. I don't know if any of you come across this idea. During the COVID pandemic, several states in the US decided that they were going to ration treatments according to skin colour. So people who were white, however sick they were had to wait at the back of the queue until those who were not white had received their treatment. I don't know whether any of you knew that this had happened. Several states this happened in. I find that absolutely shocking because working in the NHS, this is free at the point that was for everybody. This is for everybody. You don't start rationing treatment on the basis of skin colour. But health equity, I fear, may be coming to an NHS service near us, so we'll watch out for that. So, and then we've got conformity. How much diversity of thought are you aware of in the NHS? I'm not aware of an awful lot. So we're expected to conform to a sort of ideological worldview that has been chosen for us, and if we dare to express an opposite opinion, as we well know, a lot of us find out that's probably not a very good idea. The other thing that I'm sure you're very aware of, I mean, we only have to look at things like the West Yorkshire police story in the news. There are dozens other you could choose from. Actually, inclusion means exclusion for some people, and inclusion for favoured groups who are considered to be underrepresented. Okay. And I don't know how many of you know Chris Rufo. He's a writer in the States who describes EDI as the bureaucratic arm of race and gender identity ideologies. In other words, it is the way in which these ideologies get embedded into an institution. Okay. Now, what I'm going to focus, the element of EDI that I want to focus on today, and partly because of my connection with EDU, is anti-racism. Now, anti-racism, I always thought, because I'm a child of the 60s and was very much supporter of the civil rights movement, means that you treat everybody as an individual who's worthy of respect, regardless of their race or religion or the colour of their skin. That's what we believe at EDU. But there's another form of anti-racism which is prevalent right now, which is that you see group identity before you see an individual. And you risk, by doing this, reinforcing prejudice by dividing us into a world of victims and oppressors. So in this talk, I'm going to be focusing on that second form of anti-racism, which is what you will find in the NHS, sadly. And I'm also going to focus mainly on mental health, because that's my area of knowledge. Okay. So, just to remind you, who knows about Ibram X. Kendi?
Yes.
Yeah.
Henry Rogers.
Henry Rogers, thank you. Henry Rogers.
Good old Henry.
Good old Henry.
No, that's his real name.
That's
Oh,
his real
that's his real
name. I think he's in disgrace
He's
now.
been sexed up.
Yeah. So, you probably me remember his words. The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. You have to be actively anti-racist. And the only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. Who are you discriminating against, I wonder? And the only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination. So this means that rather than be colourblind, this first idea, we thought we treat everybody with respect and fairness. What you end up with, you have to start looking for racial differences everywhere. And you have to be vigilant for signs of racism constantly, everywhere. What could possibly go wrong? Well, we know what could go wrong. So one of the things that has gone wrong is the widespread introduction of these so-called anti-racist ideas in institutions like the NHS via the dreaded bureaucratic arm of EDI. So I'm not going to run through all of these, but this is just a smattering of the bodies within the NHS, like the Workforce Race Equality Standard and the NHS Race and Health Observatory, who have taken it upon them to make sure that any research that is done, any standards that are introduced, any policies that are, and frameworks that are actually embedded across the NHS, all have this anti-racism commitment. Okay, there is no escaping it. It is mandatory. Okay. And you all know our Amy. I couldn't go without mentioning our Amy. So Amy Gallagher of New Culture Forum, Stand Up to Woke, is suing the NHS for forcing racist ideology onto students. This is a really good example of where things are going wrong in mental health services. Now, you may remember that what happened was that she was a psychotherapy trainee. She attended this online workshop called Whiteness, a Problem for Our Time, and she was really concerned about the way that white people were being portrayed, they're a problem, and Christianity was apparently racist, and Amy is a Christian. So without going into too much details, I expect you know a lot of it, what it did was it led to a sequence of events that culminated in her suing the trust, the Tavistock and Portland NHS Trust, for racial and religious discrimination and discrimination on the grounds of philosophical belief, harassment and victimisation. So it becomes another one of these tribunal cases that Alka was talking about. Now, Amy's case, as we realise, is not an isolated one, but I don't know how many of you might know about this one. Now, in 2022, a colleague of mine, Dr. Kirsty Miller, we decided to find out how widespread this ideology was in clinical psychology training courses. Now, I'm a clinical psychologist. I was hearing rumours about strange things happening on my training course. And I thought, I wonder how widespread this is. There are 30 courses in the UK. We need to find out, to what extent EDI, anti-racism, all of this is being adopted. Now, just to be clear, for those of you, I wouldn't expect you to know what clinical psychologist is. I didn't know before I started training, really, but we're mental health professionals, and we're trained to assess people for mental health problems like OCD, psychological disorder, trauma, depression, and so on. And on the basis of our training, which is a scientific training, we learn from psychological science what the best, most effective treatments are, and we will then individually tailor one of these treatments to the person we're working with. It's individual, it's individualised, it's not treating somebody as a member of a group. That's what we do. Our training is over 3 years, and this is important, it's funded by NHS England. And trainees, each trainee, over those 3 years, is paid a salary. They're paid £35,000 a year. So remember this, it's a decent salary, isn't it? Okay. This includes academic and research work, but it also means that they are doing practical work, learning on the job, as it were, within an NHS trust. Okay. Now, until recently, we considered ourselves to be scientist practitioners. We're based, our work is based in science and psychological theory. So we thought, what is this we're hearing about students becoming social justice activists? This doesn't make sense. How can you be a social justice activist and help someone with their mental health problems? So we sent freedom of information requests to the 30 courses. We got 21 responses back, and they were so pleased to tell us how virtuous they were. We were quite surprised at how much information. In fact, this is how much information they gave us. If you want to have a look at that, it's online on the Safe Mental Health website. They absolutely swamped us with information that they thought we would be so pleased to hear, but we were absolutely horrified. What we firstly discovered that we didn't know was that NHS England were behind all of this. At that time they were called Health Education England, and they actually were instrumental in introducing EDI and anti-racist ideology into these courses. Not only did they do that, they paid them to do it. They paid them, each course, 30 courses from about actually probably 17, because only 17 were English. We don't know what Wales and Scotland did. But they paid these courses nearly £100,000 each to introduce an action plan to improve equity of access and inclusion for Black, Asian and minority ethnic entrants to clinical psychology training. But not only did they do that, the courses had to adhere to 9 points, things that they had to do. So they had to introduce anti-racist education for course staff and supervisors, and they had to decolonise their curriculum, and so it goes on. They had to provide mentoring for non-white students who wanted to apply for clinical training to give them a leg up. Okay? So it's come at a cost, as our report shows. Here's a slide. Isn't this delightful? This is from the University of Newcastle's course. They want to dismantle the Master's House and build the foundations for anti-racist clinical psychology. I don't know how many of you heard about this, his Master's tools will never dismantle the Master's House. This is Audre Lorde. She's, I think she might be deceased, I'm not sure, but she's an African-American activist, and she had this idea that actually if you were going to bring about meaningful change for Black people, you couldn't use what they would think of as white methods to do it. You've probably heard about this, like reading to your child is considered to be racist, you know? Sorry, I just not. But honestly, this is a form of whiteness. So, what Newcastle is saying here essentially is that the tools, in other words, the knowledge base of research and theory that's developed over decades, this is from Freudian psychoanalysis through to cognitive behaviour therapy today, and which underpins clinical psychology in its practice, it's irredeemably racist. It has to be dismantled because it maintains power over disadvantaged and marginalised groups. This is bad news for patients. What psychological treatment is going to look like if it's been dismantled and replaced with anti-racism? What is that going to look like, and is it even going to work? We don't know, but what we do know is that according to the presentation that Newcastle sent us, white trainees on the course are expected to experience discomfort about being white. They very rarely experience discomfort, so they have to do this. And I know from speaking to students on that course who are white, it's caused an enormous problem, and some of them feel discriminated against and others feel dehumanised, and when they raise concerns, they're told by their tutors, you have to mind your privilege. Now, I want you to think about this. This is what they're teaching trainees. What are those trainees going to do when they get the white patient in front of them? Just think about that. So we're moving into territory here that's anti-therapeutic. You know, you don't start blaming people because of their skin colour, and it's anti-scientific. Here's a bit more. I'm just going to sort of whiz you through some of the findings. So there is abundant whiteness training on clinical psychology courses. They interrogate whiteness, they're interested in white privilege. One of the courses, the University of East Anglia, has introduced a module on whiteness, which is being rolled out across all the courses. Some of them seem to like it, but quite a lot of students don't. And on top of that, the decolonisation, in other words, the stripping out of Western and Eurocentric science, which is so dreadful and hasn't done anything for us for centuries. What they're doing now, Liverpool decided, to try and get some advice on what to do in terms of decolonising, was to invite Merseyside Black Lives Matter in to get some consultation through workshops with staff and trainees. What a brilliant idea. I'm sure BLM will be very good at clinical psychology. And what do you get in its place? you get politicised calls content. I've got gifts from queer theory was one, which I didn't actually put on here, but intersectionality and black feminism in the therapy room, that's going to be really useful, isn't it? Well, it might be for black feminists, I don't know. This is really worrying. Minority trainees are protected from white rural populations, okay? One of the courses said, we do not send a black trainee to a white rural area for placement. What? I know, your jaw is dropping, isn't it? What? How? First of all, what we know as psychologists, this is from psychological science, is that avoidance leads to anxiety. Anxiety leads to avoidance. If you're avoiding something you're fearful of, you're actually going to make your anxiety a whole lot worse. What are they fearful of? What are these poor people who are actually potential patients of this course? You know, they are a population of people, of individuals, and they won't let, because they're so fearful that this black trainee is going to experience racism. That is a hell of an assumption, and I think that's an incredibly patronising and rather horrible way to treat your potential patients, but there we are. I'll leave you to decide on that. Segregation. Yeah, this is where we're going to be talking to Carol about this later. Another thing that NHS England required was safe spaces. We love that term. Safe spaces for trainees from racialised backgrounds and discrimination and racism reporting policies. So not only, I don't know what they think white students are going to make of this. They're considered to be, you know, I can't go near you because you might hurt me in some way. So I have to have a safe space away from you. And not only that, if I think you're going to be horrible to me and racist and I pick up on microaggressions, because you're going to, because you're looking for it everywhere, then you have a racism reporting policy. Great, isn't it? I'd hate to be a white trainee now. And indeed, some of you might have seen this story a few months ago. King's College London, which is the creme de la creme of clinical psychology training courses. You know, I tried to get in there, they didn't want me. I mean, it is really top of the range. So, so we now have, at King's College London, somebody, I think, on the course actually broke this to the press and said, look, we're really worried about what was going on here. I think you're fostering division with these race-segregated classes. They had a session called Addressing Whiteness, which was advertised as aimed at those identifying as white. Identify as white. I identify as a teapot. You know, it's ridiculous. So while students are expected to this is the other thing, white students were expected to accept responsibility for colonialism and to correct their ancestors' mistakes regardless of the students' backgrounds. I mean, how unkind is that? And a KCL spokesman said, these sessions align with NHS England's efforts to address diversity, equality in healthcare. Good old NHS England, I mean, they've met their demise, haven't they? I'm not quite sure where things are going to go now. So just finally on this, I think, almost finally on this, because I think it's, well, I hope you find it interesting and eye-opening, because it is quite shocking to us when we got this back. So there are concerns about competence, and this is another thing you really need to know about, and fitness to practice. The undermining of clinical skills and expertise. Social justice activism is favoured over a scientist-practitioner model. Lots of the courses said we'd like trainees to consider the role of activism and social change. They're not in this for social engineering, they're in this to help people with mental health problems who can't cope. You know, it doesn't make any sense to me. Clinical experience is devalued. A couple of the courses said, we'll take a critical approach, that's critical theory, to loosen the professional's grip on the expert position. And our aim is to take a non-expert position. So how many of us, how many of you would want to go and see a health professional who's lost their grip on the expert position? I mean, it's like going to a cardiologist, isn't it, who doesn't...
Yeah, they won't have their white privilege. So
well, no, exactly. Recruitment. Based on an affiliation to political ideology and protected characteristics. So these are different quotes from different courses. Candidates identifying as being from a global majority, I don't quite know what that makes us, background will be prioritised. Presence of more than one protected characteristics will have a cumulative impact. If you've got multiple protected characteristics, you may be quite a sort of vulnerable person. Why would you want to give somebody the job? It's an incredibly emotionally demanding job. You have to be really grounded to do this job, you know? And they're actually trying to bring people in who might be a little bit fragile. I'm not sure about how that's going to work. Another one says we're piloting amendments to rating criteria that would privilege EDI and anti-racism awareness and experience. Well, that's going to be useful, isn't it, when you're a clinical psychologist? One trainee said to me, he was about to start the course and he got the reading list and he said, I thought it was going on the EDI course. There was nothing on it about clinical psychology. This is how bad it's got. And then finally, shortlisting criteria amended to enable minimum academic thresholds for 2-2 and 2-1 applicants. They only ever used to take 2-1 minimum. It's usually a first. So they're actually lowering the standards and they're asking for people to be anti-racist aware rather than clinically competent. And then finally on this other section, because this blows my mind, I'm afraid, because it is having real world implications. This is shocking. The British Psychological Society, of which I used to be a member, but I wouldn't touch with the alcohol now, they decided in their wisdom that they wanted to recruit clinical psychologists with lived experience of mental health difficulties to work with patients with mental health difficulties. They seem to think this is a really good idea. Well, to be fair, I don't think any of us can go through our career as a clinical psychologist without experiencing some kind of mental difficulties. You know, when my dad died, I had to take some time off because it was really hard. So we do. But to actually think this is a good idea across the board is really worrying. If you needed heart surgery, would you choose your surgeon on the basis they had lived experience of heart disease? You wouldn't. You'd want somebody competent to do the job, wouldn't you? So bear that in mind. Now we're going to come to what matters to you locally, okay? Making anti-racism a reality, as if it isn't already. Again, NHS England. Again, I don't know what's going to happen now, they've been dismantled. Here we go. But anyway, this is for your area, the East of England Race Strategy 2021. And what do we see? One of the first things we see, which I'm going to have to peer at because I've only recently had. No, I'll look it on the screen here, that's easier. Yes, look at some of these things here that will suddenly seem very familiar to you. To acknowledge that institutional racism exists in the NHS. Yes, of course it does. Where are we? Being open to experiences that challenge your worldview of racism and inequality, e.g. white privilege. Okay. Now this slide appeared, I think it was in the Newcastle course's response to our FOI, so it's kind of used quite widely. So it's the same old. This is what really shocked me as a clinical psychologist. I don't know how many of you will know of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who she actually was instrumental in coming up with the stages of grief. Now this is for people who have had a relative or somebody who has died. This is about bereavement, this is about grief, this is about loss. And what have NHS England decided to use it for? Your journey from the shock of getting uncomfortable because you're colourblind, through to enthusiasm for being anti-racist. You know, through acceptance. You have to change the cycle of socialisation, so you become anti-racist and not colourblind. I think that, for me personally, is absolutely shocking. I think that's awful that they could use that, which is used to help people who are grieving, as a way of explaining how you can move from colourblindness to anti-racism. Okay. And then to your mental health trust. I'm sure you've all been dying to hear about them. Yes. So we've got how this strategy is affecting Norfolk and Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust. So this is the major mental health provider for the area, and it serves a population of 1.6 million. It's widely acknowledged to be a failing trust, having had a succession of CEOs over the past decade, having been declared inadequate by the Care Quality Commission in 2022, and then again in 2023, requiring improvement. It was put into special measures by NHS England in 2015, and again in 2017. It's not doing terribly well. Yet, despite the Trust's history of failures and its need for efficiency savings of £17.4 million, And Health Secretary West Streeting criticising misguided DEI agendas. What was one of the first things that the new CEO, Caroline Donovan, decided she was going to do? She was going to run a race equity conference. This was just on 10th of February this year, just come out of special measures, and they're going to run a race equity conference. Now, this will make you laugh. It was scheduled to take part on, to be held on the 31st of March, but then the organisers realised that this was Eid. so who knows, maybe they'll reschedule it for Easter, I just don't know. And it's going to be led by a luminary called Yvonne Coghill. Now, Yvonne Coghill, CBE, is described as a leading light in the NHS race equality and nursing, and she's apparently undertaken a detailed review of race across this trust, and she reports that more than 1 in 10 of the workforce at the trust are from black and minority ethnic background, or in her words, the global majority. She declares there is irrefutable evidence globally that people from black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds who live in white majority countries have poorer life chances and experiences compared to their white counterparts. Let's just have a look at Yvonne Coghill's CV. She's got a pretty impressive CV. So she is director of a company called Excellence in Action. She's a board member of the NHS Race and Health Observatory. Does that ring any bells? She was previously director for the implementation of the Workforce Race Equality Standard. Any bells? And she was senior programme lead for inclusion for the NHS Leadership Academy. She's done rather well, hasn't she? And as I say, she's actually held posts in 2 of the NHS bodies that I flagged up at the beginning of this talk. Okay? You might well ask why Yvonne Coghill is interested in a trust that serves an area where there is a lower proportion of non-white residents compared to the national average, and we'll come back to that. Okay, I'm nearly done. So, what's important to know, as you may all be very aware, is that North Norfolk has a high proportion of elderly people living in rural and coastal areas, where according to the North Norfolk Health and Wellbeing Partnership Strategy for 2023 to 26, there is a dearth of services. This report notes that coastal communities have been long neglected and overlooked, with limited research on their health and well-being. And reference is made to 2 further reports, major reports, not least one by the Chief Medical Officer, highlighting the need for action to reduce the impact of health inequalities on coastal and rural communities. Why, oh why, is this trust prioritising a race equity conference when there are health inequalities amongst the population it serves and a dearth of services for the overlooked elderly and rural poor in the region's coastal communities? You have to ask this question, don't you? One of the things that I also am told by reliable sources is that areas like Norfolk and Dorset, for example, with white populations, are being targeted due to concerns about rural racism. Do you remember my report which picked up rural racism? What does this say about the way that populations are being viewed? So, any efforts to try and question this are likely to be stymied. We're also finding senior leadership roles, and this is where I'm hoping Carol will be able to enlighten us more on this. So senior leadership roles are unlikely to be given to those who don't sign up to this anti-racist EDI agenda, unless they declare their white privilege. Again, I refer you to the West Yorkshire Police. You know, I fear that there are going to be more problems. I think another problem that might raise its head, but I'm not really entirely sure about this one, is that the trust seems to be working very closely with the police, and I'm getting a little bit concerned about non-crime hate incidents. So watch this space on that front as well. Another trust who has been suspended for misgendering a male patient.
Paedophile.
Yeah. So that doesn't kind of add up, does it? Where's your race equity there? So I'm going to conclude, you'll be glad to hear now. So I'm going to quote our colleague, Inaya Folarin-Imam, lovely piece from the Daily Telegraph. It was actually about the Yorkshire Police, but I think it actually applies really well here. We face a fundamental choice. Either we uphold the principle that all individuals, regardless of race, have the capacity to serve with integrity and impartiality, or we continue to divide society by judging people on the basis of their racial group. If equality means anything, it must mean equal standards, equal opportunity and equal treatment. Abandoning this conception of equality risks tearing apart the very fabric of public trust that we're so desperate to restore.
Right, Carol, I think we're going to save our applause for when
Yeah,
we get
Carol,
there.
absolutely.
But I was going to go.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
yeah.
I'm just going to run through this. If this race equity conference pops up again, write to the CEO. If you want to, express your concern about where's the money coming from. You could even go as far as putting in an FOI if you wanted to. How much is this costing? You can write to your MP. If there were a conference, you could arrange a protest. Spread the word. Please, if each of you just told one other person and asked that one other person to tell another one person, we might actually begin to get people to do something about it. Join DDU. Just sign up to Save Mental Health if you're interested. But most importantly, we want to hear from Carol about her case, because she's going to be crowdfunding. So we hope that you might be able to help with that. And that's where I am.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome.
It's hard not to clap.
Meticulous, very, I don't know whether to thank you for that tour through hell, basically.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, I think yes, that's it. If anyone locally wants to, I don't know, if you want to keep an eye on what's happening at the local hospital, send round the address if anyone can do that kind of practical work, that would be fantastic. I would offer to do it myself, but I'm up to my eyes in editing the report that I was telling you about. So it's there. I mean, it's up to us, isn't it? We know there isn't anybody else going to do it for us. But let's hear from another brave warrior from
I just, as soon as I saw EDI on the Focus NFC forum newsletter, and I thought, oh, got to go to that because I would want to share my experiences of equality, diversity and so-called inclusion in the York NHS. So I decided to join the York NHS as a healthcare support worker about 2.5 years ago. I work in the coronary care department now. I worked for 30 odd years in insurance, but I decided I wanted a part-time job in something that gave something back. And then last March I was looking on the staff intranet and I saw that they were advertising training courses, one of which was titled Maximising Your Leadership Potential for Black, Asian and Minority Ethnic Staff. So I went into it and looked in a little bit further, and it said this course is for Black, Asian, Minority Ethnics. There are other leadership courses available, but nothing exclusively for Black, Asian and Minority Ethnics who need a safe space. Why do they need a safe space? I work in a multi-ethnic cultural team, and that is something that I enjoy passionately. They are from South Africa, Nigeria, well, worldwide. And we have each other's backs, we laugh a lot, we argue a lot in the staff room, not with the patients. But we get on extremely well, and just reading that advertisement for the course was just, I was just stunned. I thought, why? Why do they need a safe space from me? What are they anticipating me to do? And I went home and thought about it, and I was stewing over it. And I always say to my daughter, if you see something wrong, do something about it. And we were having dinner, and I was moaning about it, and she said, oh, I suppose you're going to do something about it then. And sort of caught myself in a corner with that one. So I wrote to the equality, diversity, inclusion person who was running the course. And I said, how can you have a leader who cannot work with white people. The course is excluding people on the colour of their skin. I don't actually know what BAME is, you know. I mean, we had this discussion at work, and we were all saying, well, it can't include me because I'm white, but I am a minority, you know, and they were getting very complex about it. So I wrote and I said, look, you know, there are other ways. I'm not saying that the reason for the course was because they wanted to increase the minority ethnic people on the board of directors. And they didn't think they were getting a fair crack at the whip. And I was just saying, well, there are other ways of going about it rather than on racial segregation. Racial segregation has never been endorsed in this country, and it's just ironic that it is being by equality, diversity and inclusion policy. So we had Susan froze on emails, and she told me that it was the workforce res equality standards that required them to do this, and it was necessary that they could do it under the protected characteristics of the Equality Act. And so I said, okay, well, there's also things you've got to comply with under the Equality Act before you bring in protected positive action. Because by this time I'd contacted the Free Speech Union. I'm a member of Free Speech Union, and I was just getting a little bit concerned that action might be taken against me at work, so I just wondered whether there was any help there. And fortuitously I was put in touch by Free Speech Union with Alka. They said, suggest you get in touch with DDU. And I was showing Alka the email to and fro, and she said, no, you've got, before they do that, there are different things you've got to comply with under the Act. And so I wrote back and I said, have you complied with these before you've thought of segregation? There are other ways of doing this. Segregation is wrong. I respectfully disagree. I've got nothing else to say on the matter, was what I got. That's it. And I thought, well, there's a lot more to say on the matter. So I wrote to everybody on the board of directors. I wrote to everybody who was a governor of the hospital. And I knew there was going to be one of their public meetings. I got an email back from the governors acknowledging receipt of my email, in which I was asking them to carefully consider yet again the process by which they were trying to achieve increased minorities in leadership roles. It wasn't the outcome, although I am a very strong believer on the best person for the job getting the job. It was the way in which they were segregating and causing division within the staff to do it. And so I got, like I say, I got acknowledgement of my email from the Board of Governors, but I never got any other response other than acknowledgement of the email. And then I got a letter. I didn't get any acknowledgement from the Board of Directors. So I was thinking, well, they've just shut me down. They're just trying to cancel me. They're just trying to ignore me again. So I went to HR and I put in a grievance, which is called a respect procedure. I put in a grievance. The next thing I got was a letter from the head of the York NHS Trust, the head of the board, saying, we discussed your letter at the public meeting. I didn't attend. I didn't know it was going to be discussed. we cannot know what it is like to be black. We are asked to, we have got requirements, legal requirements under the RES report, and we believe that it has won, this leadership course has won awards. We believe that this course is so good that we have given it extra funding. Now this is at a time when the same person, the chairman of the board, wrote in the staff newsletter that the trust needed to save £150,000 per day, and we're spending more money on separate courses and even, you know, over and above on this one that divides everybody. So that was it. He said, oh, and also I understand that you've made a grievance, you've put a grievance in under our respect procedure, and that I trust this letter answers everything. I thought, well, no, you still haven't answered, have you? You still haven't told me on what grounds you think that segregation is the best way to go about this, and whether you've considered all the other requirements before you segregate. So I went back to HR and I said, I'm sorry, I'm still not happy about this. And HR just said, you've had a letter from the chairman of the board, you've got nowhere else to go. And so I went to ACAS. I went through the ACAS early reconciliation process. And for 6 weeks I waited for them to come and talk to me. I should say at this stage that nobody, not a soul, has spoken to me at work. Nobody from HR, no senior nurses, no management, nobody has had a conversation with me. I find that amazing. I used to be a manager. I mean, if I had an employee who wasn't happy, you go and talk to them. Not a soul has spoken to me. So yeah, I went through. They said go through early reconciliation process, and that shows that you are trying to reconcile your differences. And I said, well, that'd be a joke. They aren't even speaking to me. They've done nothing. So for 6 weeks, I waited, and they didn't engage with the ACAS process. So I got an early reconciliation certificate from there, and then now what do I do? You know, and I was really stuck. But thankfully, my good friend here put me in touch with a very good legal team, or a barrister from DL Law, and she said, "Oh, super! Let's take this case and go forward with the employment tribunal." Because I'd submitted it, but it was in layman's terms. They tell you can do this at ACAS, but the reality of it is you can't really. Because I was trying, and it had got acknowledgement from the employment tribunal, but it had come back that you have got little chance of success, and in view of that, we will want you to pay a deposit.
Sorry to put in, but could your union not help you with the wording in the ACAS?
I wasn't a member of the union. I did join one, Workers of England union, and they didn't help me with the wording, and in fact they weren't very good. Yeah, I got that back from the tribunal, at which point I got proper legal advice, and Anna, my barrister, then put it all into legal jargon, and that was agreed at the preliminary hearing at the Employment Tribunal in February of this year. The NHS had tried to get me kicked out. They had said to me, would you like to drop the case if you will agree to a hands up hands off, something like that agreement. If you agree to drop the case, then we will agree not to come to you for costs. At which time, I've got to admit, there were a few husband and wife discussions, and I was sweating a bit. But I stuck to it, and we decided we were going to go through it. And with the revisions that Anna made at the preliminary hearing, it was decided that there was a case to answer, that it wasn't seen as a waste of time or anything, which I thought on my own submission. And the case is now progressing to a full hearing in November. But, you know, when I think, I look after patients in corridors, on trolleys. They need to go to the loo. We are holding up sheets and trying to put them in, and they are wasting money. And we are, there was another time on a shift when I was in accident and emergency. I was the only white nurse, and my other colleagues, not my usual team, were working, and we have to work together to manoeuvre patients and lift them, you know, off a trolley onto a bed and whatever. And they are speaking in their own language. And we had an old patient on the bed there, and I was saying, are we after 3? 1, 2, 3, and they're looking at me as if I'm. There cannot be teamwork if we start going into cliques and we start speaking our own language and we don't work together as a team. And by running diverse, segregated courses and having segregation, it is endorsing, it's saying that that is okay and that is not okay. That, you know, I've got patients who are frightened because they don't know what's going on. So we are taking our case and we're hoping that we get a positive result in November. So we're fighting this, segregation. Like I say, it has never been endorsed in the UK, and we do not want it endorsed in the back door by equality, diversity and inclusion policies.
Don't know what to say actually, because I think well, first of all, the first thing I'd say is please do donate and spread the word around for the crowdfunder. I can tell you from the research that I've been doing, taking out an employment tribunal case, and please, Carol, say I did warn you, this is going to be, it is not, you know, some of these cases go on for years, and you know, you're talking about one individual against a major national employer who will be lawyered up to they will be HR'd to the eyeballs, they will have the money and the resources there. And most importantly, I think, of all, I think what is unique, I can honestly say in all the 5,000 plus cases I've looked at, there's never been a case brought by somebody who is doing it purely for principle. Right? In every case it's been because there's been a detriment, there's been a dismissal, or there's been a breach of contract, and somebody's pursuing, rightly, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be doing it, absolutely they should be doing it, but this is really a case of principle. And the ironic thing is that there is a clause, and this is I think what, within the Equality Act, that actually prohibits segregation. Section 13, number 5. We think it actually comes from previous legislation, or it might be, I'm not sure if it's actually been introduced new, but before, it's all, even if it was there on the legal papers, it was never needed to be discussed or talked about because it was just assumed, you know, we do not have segregation, this is not America. It's never been, you know, there might have been informal forms of segregation arising, but never kind of institutionally and in our public services. And particularly in, I mean, the NHS has a very symbolic place in people's hearts and minds and thinking and culture because of its whole development through the social democratic era, which is clearly changing now. So, you know, you have this, is already in there in the Equality Act, but the rest of the Equality Act is so imprecisely worded, there's so much and so much from different kind of jurisdictions in there, and it really is allowing. It's allowing essentially the law to regulate. This is why we see it not just in the NHS. You know, your local garage station will have some EDI policy somewhere. Right? You see it everywhere because what it actually says, it's much broader than even race. It says the law is there to regulate all your interactions. And that is saying we do not trust you to conduct your ordinary life in your places of work, in your scouts, in your hospitals, in your doctors, in your dentists, in your vets. We don't trust you to be able to deal with each other unless you follow this script, right? So it's I think that's why, you know, everybody feels a sense of suffocation at some point in their workplaces especially, and nobody's quite sure why or where it's coming from. Well, you know, it's not just the Act, obviously, but that is the legal underpinning. And Carol, just hats off to you. You are so brave doing this.